Yeah, there's not any more of that. That's what it is. It's mauled 42 of the boys. Not 40 little brats, right? If it was 40 little brats, we learned last year that 40 is a symbolic number, and we could say, whew, it's just a metaphor. No, 42. Not scared 42 obnoxious kids who needed scaring because, that'd be awkward, but some kids only learn the hard way. No, mauled 42. So just to be clear, the Bible says that Elisha Jr. was so upset about picking on him for premature baldness, some of us have dealt with that, that he cursed these kids to rip them apart. 2 classrooms full of kids. Imagine how many parents that brought then. And the Bible says God went right along with it. That's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Peace be with you. Okay, the Bible does tell that story. That's what it says. But if that is what it means, if that is what God is really like, I'm out. I quit. I'm done. No more. I want nothing to do with a God who prioritizes the sensitivities of powerful men over the lives of the vulnerable, then or now. I want nothing to do with anyone who could even imagine, anyone who could bring themselves to think of a God that would choose the side of a narcissist man in power over Palestinian children. By the way, Jericho's in Palestine. I cannot fathom having such a depraved sense of spirituality to think, here's an example of God on the side of vengeance, and so we have free reign to torment, fill in the blank. Refugees, gay folks, trans folks, women, the environment, whatever it is. I can't fathom what it would be like to follow that kind of God and to think, see, Jesus loathes them. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. I can, however, imagine very much reconsidering what this story is really about. If you happen to be the kind of person who believes that every word in the Bible is true in a historical kind of a way, that's fine. That's your claim. Then this historical story, some might think, might be exactly about not losing one's patience. The Bible is full of heroes who do terrible and stupid things. In fact, other than Jesus, you name a hero, I've got a stupid thing they did, something that you should not do. The Bible is full of lessons. It says it describes a certain behavior that it does not prescribe. It shows you exactly what this happens and says, don't do that. Okay, this could be an example of don't do that. Or, if you're the kind of person who thinks, my favorite stories from Jesus are parables, they're stories, and I really love poetry, like in the Psalms, or the Bible is so full of dreams and visions and allegories. If that's how your spirituality rolls, then listen to this, because we've all been to this place. You probably don't have to think back too very long to remember when you were really hot under the collar about something. Just something in your life, small, big, whatever it is. Someone did something, someone said something, it just touched a nerve in you. Not about premature baldness, but whatever the thing is for you. And 10 minutes later, after the conversation's gone and they've kind of left over there, and you think finally, aha, I've got that comeback. And then you just say it to the universe, in your heart, and you got him then. You really got him. Or later that day, you stay so angry, it kind of sits in your stomach, and you ruin dinner, with the people you care about. You can't watch your favorite television show, and you finally go to bed, and you're so torn up inside that you start to imagine like tearing them up in some kind of gross way that you don't want to say out loud, like cutting their brakes or poisoning their food, or whatever it might be. You don't say that stuff out loud, especially from a pulpit. But I'm sure we've all been there in these daydreams of just, I wish I could get them back. Now, typically, when we're there, we do not go a straight line from, point A, my marriage is great, work is great, life is great, and then someone just annoys you, and then I want to rip their guts out. It's not a straight line to there. Typically, it goes more like this story that she just read. Elisha is in a place of deep grief. He lost a friend. He lost a mentor. He lost his direction in life. And he did everything he could do to hang on to that person, kind of pathetically so. I will never leave you. I'm going to hold on to you. These are grown-ups. But Elijah, the senior, it was his time to go. And Elisha did not know how to say goodbye. He did not have the emotional resources to handle this loss. So then, when the mantle of leadership fell to him, he was not prepared. He was uncertain. Eventually, he was ashamed of his place, and that led to anger pointed directly at the people who were trying to help. And listen, when I get angry, who do you think gets the worst brunt of it? When you get angry, who do you think gets the worst brunt of it? Directly the people who are trying the hardest to support him. When he was sad, he's overwhelmed first, then he lashes out to the people who cared. Church, is that starting to sound familiar? But heavy hangs the one who wears the crown. So Elisha still had responsibility. They had not invented mental health days off yet at this point in the world. They had not, it's barely invented now. So when the town needed a prophet to solve their problem, he solves the problem. He pushes through. He still hasn't faced his grief. He still hasn't worked through his reactions or responses. And now he spends all his energy at work. It's a short little story, but run with it. He spends his energy at work, and none of us have ever done that. None of us, when we're overwhelmed, have we thrown ourselves into ignoring the rest of life by going to work. Finally, this is when things bubble over. If a crew of neighborhood kids had picked on Elisha about his baldness a week ago, it would have slid right off his back. No big deal. If they had done it maybe right after his mentor died, maybe he would have yelled at them. Maybe he would have called them names like a brat. But now, with layers upon layers upon layers of feelings, none of them processed, finally he just lashes out. And it's just my sanctified imagination, but I believe that he is actually playing out this scene in his mind. I believe that because I've done it. I believe that because you have done it. You have played these things out in your mind. But if you want to believe he had a magic trick with bears, that's your call. For me, I know exactly what it is like. I know what it's like to burn out and to then burn up with anger. I know what it is like to wear down and then to wear out everyone around me. I know exactly what it is like to want a peaceful life and to work toward a peaceful life, but when that gets thrown into turmoil, I know what it's like to just lose it with rage and to play out my revenge and to fall into a spiral that really only makes me more furious about me, not about them. Especially when I'm right. That's the worst. When I know I am right. And especially when I'm cursing someone who deserves it. Oh, they deserve something worse than two bears ripping their little faces off. When my righteous indignation gets so real, it makes it even harder for me to get unstuck from my anger. And all that heart-rending mess, it just feeds on itself, and so it just shuts down any outlet. It's kind of like that anger. It's kind of like when it's really cold out and you're shivering and you decide just to pee your pants. It feels good for a minute, but you haven't solved anything, and you have one more problem, and it's all your fault. Okay, so what's the takeaway? If this story, if all you're hearing in this story is don't get angry, you've missed the point. Because God knows how we tick. God knows Jesus was angry. Don't get angry is not fair. You can't say that to kids, can't say that to adults. Is the lesson, well, you should try harder, you should pray harder, and then you can manage your mental health. Oh, no, I don't think it's that either. Because if trying harder ever solved our deep issues, like imagine, if you just, I'm so stressed, well, try hard not to be stressed. Oh, I've really got an addiction, try harder not to do that thing. I'm really lonely, try harder to make friends. I'm so full of shame, try harder not to be ashamed. Well, now you make me more guilty about being ashamed. If it was possible to pray those away, wouldn't you have done it already? The lesson with these bears I think it starts at the beginning of what Paula read, and even way before that. He was never able to get the words out that he needed to say. Imagine if Elisha had said, "Thank you, Elijah. I'm going to miss you. I love you." Imagine if he said that. Imagine the turn in his heart if he could have just brought that out. He never grew up knowing, he never learned the emotional granularity to understand his own feelings or to describe them or to work with them. And that was a problem way before he was going bald. So after Elijah dies, second thing, Elisha needed help to grieve. Grief is an art. There are parts of grief that are a skill. And as terrible as this may sound to some of you, this is where we practice grief, in places like this. In a culture where church is so often pushed to the sidelines and people come in here. You know, yesterday for the funeral we had, it is the first funeral in 15 or 16 years that I've done that no cell phones went off. Okay? And those cell phones never go off on a Sunday, or when they do, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I forgot. Like, we all know. But when you go to a funeral, there's people who have not practiced grief, and they show up, like, you know, they're not prepared. They're wearing a t-shirt, their cell phones are going off, they're doing things. They don't know grief. Here is where we get to practice some of the depth of how to deal with these hard emotions. And billions of people, churches, mosques, whatever, they learn these models for how to honor life and death. In places like this, we know that love has squared up against death, and love wins every time. In places like this, if Elisha had been less of an independent, do-it-himself kind of a guy, and he had allowed a community to support him, he'd still feel sad, absolutely. He'd still have anger, of course, but he would have known better, and he would have been surrounded by caring people who could show him how to manage that grief. One of the ways he would learn to carry that grief, third thing in this story, instead of going straight to problem-solving mode, which is, he's probably great at that, which probably got him to a leadership position, which probably felt like a good escape. Many of us do it. But if instead of that, he would have taken a break, imagine how different the story would have been. Imagine the 50 men who came up to Elisha and said, "We're here to help." And imagine if he said, "Let's just take a rest. We don't need to do that today. That it's not going to help." Imagine if he said, "Well, y'all do what you need to do. I'm going to take a rest." Imagine if he looked back to his mentor. The most famous story of Elijah is when he was so stressed out that he took a nap and he ate some cake. And then he took another nap and he ate some cake. There are times when double nap days are the only way through, and Elisha didn't learn that. So he should have taken a break. We never would have gotten to these bears. Or fourth, let's imagine, he still gets mad at those 50 men. But then when the next guys come with a problem to solve, to keep him like amped up into problem solving, did you notice, this is close reading, but did you notice where Elisha went with that? They said, "The water is bad and the land is unproductive." Elisha responded, "Okay, I fixed that. It'll no longer cause death." Okay? Freud would hate it when a Freudian slip ends up in the Bible, but that's what that is. He said, they didn't say death, he said death. You know what a Freudian slip is? It's when you say one thing, but you mean another. That is my favorite joke. That is my favorite joke in the whole world, and one of the only ones I can say at church. So some of us think, that we're over it, but he is so fixated on grief. And when we think we're right, when we think we're going to go escape in some way, and then our feelings follow us, which is fine, that happens. But notice, pay attention when you're talking to people, when you're noticing things. Pay attention to the red flags that you have when you're still carrying that grief unprocessed. If Elisha had done that, he may have taken that break. But fifth, even if he didn't slow down, even if he's fixated on death and he's stuck in this downward spiral, even if he was on the edge and he's just seconds away from punching a wall or screaming at God or drowning his sorrows or doing things good or bad, managing it however, even if he's just there sitting there, fists clenched, ready, the next camel that cuts him off, he's going to scream at it and do all the things he do in road rage, camel rage, I don't know what that is. Even at that last nerve, we know do not take your anger out on children. Do not take your anger out on dogs. I mean, I get hot pretty fast, and when I see someone, back when I had a dog, I'd go to the dog park. When I would see someone kick their dog for something, whoo, boy, my face gets red pretty fast. Yeah. Don't even let yourself imagine taking your anger out on people who are weaker than you. The last sentence, like this is unhealthy, but it's healthier. Like when you're in therapy and your therapist says, like, okay, that was a good step. Like there are many more steps to take, but imagine the good step if the last sentence had been, and then Elisha daydreamed about two bears going to maul their parents because the children were such unholy terrors. Okay? It's a little more fair, right? Or he could have said, then Elisha remembered that evil king who had a full head of hair and he was jealous about it, so he sicked those bears right down the royal court. Okay? He could have projected, and that would have been a better strategy for dealing with his despair and for keeping his heart away from abusing kids. But instead, we see 5 steps, at least 5 steps, where we are called to deal with our own emotions in a more productive, more communal, more honest ways. Which is great advice on a Sunday morning when you're doing fine. You could take a little checklist, you could write those notes down, you could put it in your wallet, you could read it, you could forget it next week, and then when you're really stressed out, you'd really forget it. It's impossible advice when you're surrounded by the weight. So here's the real lesson. Other than that checklist, here's the real lesson, I think, when it comes to Elisha's bears. This is the biggest takeaway. Center yourself now while you have the resources so that you have a center when life hits you so hard. Practice feeling. Practice naming those feelings. Practice saying what you need to say to people when the stakes are low, because it only gets harder. Pause as a holy act of resistance through your normal life. When you're not stressed, pause when you're calm to show the powers of the world that you can slow down, to convince yourself. Pay attention to those hints of dysregulation, those patterns of trauma that keep following you, so that you have experience recognizing when your feelings lie to you about you. That happens all the time. Your feelings lie to you about who you are. Embed yourself in a community. It could be this, it could be whatever it is. Embed yourself in a community so that when you need support, it's there. And in all things, prioritize the vulnerable. Practice thinking about them as off limits from pain, whether that's in your anger, whether that's in politics, whether it's anything. It's habits of not hurting them. And if Elisha had done that through his life, if you do that through your life, will you still feel sad sometimes? Of course. Will you still experience shame once in a while? Absolutely. Will anger rise up? You better believe it. Will your imagination go to really gross places that you're embarrassed to even think about? Yeah, that's going to happen probably. But will those things define your story? No, they won't. Because you are creating the resources to move past them. You and the Spirit are creating a path to move past all of that. Now, you may be in a place where you wish those bears would maul your greatest enemy, and you may be in a place where you cannot help but see over the idea. You may not even have the power to resist that right now, but our scriptures have given you a roadmap for how to build new strength when it might matter the most. And what you do then with your worst feelings, how you ultimately let them go or channel them towards something better, that can define something about who you are and who you are called to be. May it be so.